Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is dedicated to all of the long-haul truckers, the big rig drivers, from myself and Michael, as there was some requests that there be a bit more action to keep them wide awake on their long journeys. And so Michael got straight down to business and knocked this one out in a few days. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Overnight Express. Let's get straight into that. I drove all night just to be with you, R. Orbison. Scott geared up as he left the state inspection station. He had passed and he was still on schedule. He hadn't mentioned that he would be exceeding his hours this evening. He'd be alert, always plenty of energy drinks, and he had a plethora of tunes and stories in easy reach. With that thought, he gulped down the last of his current Red Bull. That's the good stuff. He smiled to himself as he barreled down the open road, the last of the evening sunlight bright to his left as he headed north. Not too many people on the road today, even though it's a Friday. Everybody headed towards the city. I'm heading for the space between. His internal smile widened. He had no interest in dodging Taurons who felt he had no right to be on the road. He felt the same way about most of them. There was one now, an old beta hippie van, a V-dub microbus up ahead, poking along. The passing lane was reasonably clear, and the car drivers would just have to be patient while he downshifted to pass these weirdos. Hey, 1969 called. They want your van, he thought as he glanced at the elderly vehicle. Weird. The windows are all darkened. It was in pretty good shape for its age, like it was only a few years old. Someone had obviously worked hard to maintain or restore it. They definitely had kept it somewhere out of the weather. His expression soured. They're speeding up to keep me from passing. Jerks! He accelerated as he gained once more and began to pass them, and they suddenly slowed. What the fuck? Crap! He noticed the state trooper far too late. Maybe he could use honesty and a little pity to weasel out of the citation. August 14th, 1969. Are we ever going to get there? Wanda whines from the back seat. We won't be able to get in and find a camping space. Weasel, who was high and driving, wobbled his head. No probs, Wan. We have the van. All we have to do is find a place to park. That'll be our camp. Raisin was all but passed out in the back seat beside Wanda, but Daffodil, who sat behind him in the front passenger seat, was all too awake and alert. Weasel, the point is that we may have to park a long way from the festival. We don't want to have to hike for miles to get to the stages. Plus, we're almost out of food thanks to someone having a case of the munchies. Weasel gave a guilty chuckle. Look, I think it's real close now. We're in New York State. It's already dark and we may miss it. Maybe we should park it until, daylight, man? The argument continued for a while, never heated, just whining from tired young people and the assurances of the very stoned. Eventually, Weasel gave his ultimatum. Look, if anyone else wants to drive, that's fine. But I need some food and some sleep. Real soon or we're all going to crash physically and metaphorically. He sniggered at his own weak humour. Weasel slowed the van and allowed the big truck to pass. He pulled into the next driveway, a small filling station, and watched the big rig pull over onto the shoulder. He glanced at his companions. Daffodil, Raisin, Wanda, do you think the sun's low enough for a little snack time? I feel like having some pork, What'd you say? Should we go back to this little hidey hole and use the pullover area to play damsel in distress? You up for that, Daffodil? No pride at all. Trucker sucked up like a bitch, Highway Patrolman Trujillo thought to himself. He'd never say it aloud since his in-car and body recorders captured audio as well as video. Makes it hard to talk to these a-holes like they deserve, he internally grouched. Time was, they would get an arse chewing for their citation. He didn't really care much. He would scratch out citations for a few more speeders and then grab a bite before the drunks started wobbling their way home. Typical workday. Make a little money for the state, make a few drivers pay a little more in taxes, and get the drivers to be conscientious about public safety. At least they'd be cautious and slow down for a few miles. Somebody had to do it, right? Otherwise people might start thinking they could just speed any time they liked. As he approached the little pullover area he normally used as his hunting stand, he noted an antique-looking van in its space. A woman in a large hat waved him over. It had gotten shady as the sun sank behind the tree line, and the early dusk of the wooded rural highway settled towards full-on night. It was hard to make out details until he drew closer. Skinny and pale, he thought. Modern-day hippie or maybe older. Giant sunglasses, probably an old chick, and his mood soured. No tail to chase, and I'll probably have to call for a tow for the POS van. So much for tickets. He stepped out and greeted the woman. Good evening, ma'am. I am. So perfect with your timing, officer. The woman interrupted. I'm afraid I'm having trouble with my old van. I just can't get it going properly. Would you mind taking a look? I'm just helpless with mechanical repairs. Well, ma'am, that's not really what we do. I can get you a tow truck with a mechanic. They can sometimes get you fixed up on the roadside. Oh, thank you. She interrupted once more, her voice sounding a little reedy and dry. Well, there's something that perhaps you might help with. I wanted to ensure that my window tint was legal for this state. Would you take a look? Now that he looked, the tint was black out as with luxury limousines, maybe even darker. He stepped closer to the sliding passenger door. Ma'am, I can tell you, that tint is too dark for any state. Well, it's too dark to be safe, especially after sundown. He attempted to peer inside. Is there someone else with you? Someone inside the van. He whiffed the air and caught the telltale, sickly sweet odour of cannabis smoke. Legal to use, but not while driving, he thought as he reached for the door handle. Do you mind if I take a look? He didn't wait for consent. He never did. Easier to interfere and act before they could think. Dimwit dopeheads. As he hauled open the door, he realised that he had not activated his lights, nor had he called in the incident on his radio. He had been too busy looking at the woman to pay proper attention. Odd. Well, that's not like me. A pretty dangerous thing to omit. Incredibly strong hands clutched him and he felt himself lifted from the ground and into the van. He tried to raise his arms to fight to grasp and a grip at his pistol, but then he felt teeth sink into his flesh and a sudden weakness flooded his soft tissues, and his blood drained from him to refresh the flesh of the undead beings in the van. (1969) No worries, man. Weasel attempted to calm his passengers. Nobody will hassle us this close to the boneyard. And he waggled his eyes at Daffodil and then at Wanda, who each rolled their eyes in turn. We'll just pull in behind the old church building and out of sight, man. We'll wake up early and get on our way to that farm and rock out at Woodstock. Well, no one was comfortable in the van, except maybe Raisin. He could sleep anywhere, and did so as often as possible. It was hot, even with the windows rolled down and feet hanging from the available windows and sliding door. Yet, with herbal assistance in the form of a mushroom tea and a fatty passed around in a circle, they all managed to fall asleep. At about 3 in the morning, Weasel stepped out to relieve himself. He had polished off Wanda's wine before they decided to crash. He chose to urinate on a fresh-looking grave just inside the fence. "Ah, yeah, man. I'll just like water the flowers, flower child style." It took him a moment to realize that while the grave showed fresh-turned earth, it was clearly not new. There were no new flowers and the headstone looked old. He bent forward to examine it. A pair of hands seized him by the front of his already grubby t-shirt, and before he could stand or even cry out, teeth sank into his throat. Wanda crept from the back seat and went out to look for Weasel. He was kinder with Daffy, but raising was no use, so maybe she could catch the wheeze out in the dark and have some fun. She looked around in the dim light. Her eyes were adjusted to the dark, but the moon was on the way to settling, and a silvery grey ambience was all that was left of the light. "Oh, wait. There he is. By that little building. The, mausoleum. Yeah." She crept forward, intending to surprise him. She could make out his silhouette, tall and thin. And then she caught a whiff of him. Not the pleasant odour of hemp that permanently permeated his clothing. This smelled like rotten flesh and fresh blood. The figure whirled round and grasped her by the shoulders. In the moment she had to glimpse the face, she could see that it was definitely not Weasel. And she was soon stretched out beside the young man whose attention she had sought, both of them in a coma-like sleep. The rest of their party was soon placed beside them, each mostly drained of blood and barely breathing. The tall, thin being that had stood at the doorway to the mausoleum looked around at his companions. "We have feasted well tonight. Now we must decide. Do we finish these and dispose of their vehicle, or do we attempt to turn them? We haven't turned anyone in a long time. I don't feel right. That last one with a funny purple mark on his face, there was a strange taint in his blood. Yes, a strange quality in all of them." Scott fumed about the citation. He did not need the aggravation. He had been going barely 10 over the limit, and he told that snotty statey about the loser van driver. Probably high, definitely aggressive and dangerous. "I acted like he didn't believe me," he said to himself. He often spoke his internal dialogue while driving. It kept him alert when he was tired and sane when he was frustrated. At least I lost the freak show van. His thoughts soon turned neutral. He listened to an audio story by his favourite narrator and author, premiering that night for members only. "This is going to be good. Dead man talking. Help me forget my troubles. #TeamFEAR. About an hour later, he listened to the rap by the narrator and agreed with his assessment of "wow," stated several times. Night had arrived a while back and the traffic had thinned considerably. This was when it got tough. Not much to do to get the rig down the road, and so he had to seek distractions. He was still pretty wound up about the story he'd heard. It had been about lonely places and dark nights, creepy things out in the dark with a hunger for human flesh. The storyteller was particularly on his game this time. It gave him chills. He saw dim yellow headlights appear in his side mirror and a dark, boxy outline of an old van. Can't be. They should have been way ahead of me and I haven't passed them. Maybe they stopped somewhere. Still, weird. He gave an involuntary shiver and felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. It didn't make sense to him. He didn't even know for sure if it was the same vehicle. The driver accelerated to pull up beside his cab. He spared them several glances. Crap! Same POS van! He gritted out between his teeth. Same stupid flowers and same freakish tint. Even the windshield. How did he see out of that thing? Especially in the dark. He slowed slightly. The other driver matched his speed. He accelerated, but was careful this time to stay no more than 10 miles per hour over the limit. Still, the other driver matched him. This time, the van driver seemed to anticipate his every move. Fine, maybe a little encouragement to drive friendly. He started to drift over into the passing lane to try and force the other driver to either pass or fall behind him. The van drifted to the shoulder, but continued to match his speed. "Okay, have it your way," he said. He reached over and fished out an empty glass bottle. He liked to drink the Mexican Cokes from them. The glass made it taste cleaner than did plastic containers, and besides, it gave him ammo for just such an occasion. He downshifted and accelerated as fast as his engine would allow, and gained just a few feet on the van, and then tossed the bottle out of the window. It crashed satisfyingly into the darkened windshield. "Take that, butthole!" he screeched triumphantly as the van dropped back to his blind spot. "Not even any evidence, just broken glass everywhere." He laughed and felt better than he had before the ticketing. He checked his mirrors and slowed slightly. Still nothing. And then a thump on the rear door of the trailer. Did he just hit my trailer? He angrily began to engine brake and hoped that the noise and sudden slowing would put off the idiots. The trailer wobbled and he saw it drift alarmingly towards his driver's side window. He steered out of it and regained control. He heard another lighter thump, but this time he could see the van on his driver's side corner, as ever matching his speed. It was slightly behind him though, just a few feet. He swerved suddenly and completely into the passing lane and applied his regular brakes hard. The tyres skidded and screeched, and the trailer again started to drift, this time towards the cruise lane. "Ha! Bet you can match that!" he shouted in a maniacal glee. And when he was sure that he was back in control and could safely do so, he checked his mirrors. There was no one, nothing behind him. Did they crash? He shook his head and shrugged. Who cares? I got places to be before daybreak. I don't feel so good, Wanda whined. Was there something extra in the shrooms? She nudged Raisin, who had supplied the aforementioned illicit substance. Nah, man, very basic blend, Raisin, at last awake, said hoarsely. He remained flat on his back beside a weird old grave that was covered in concrete. Weasel and Daffodil both sat up, each propping each other from the side as they leaned their backs against the headstone. Dude, I don't feel so right, Weasel chimed in. Like all weak and stuff. Trippy. He shook his head as if to clear his thoughts, and then clutched at it as if to keep it from spinning. Hey, we gotta get going. We're missing the festival. The sun had definitely risen, yet it took them nearly half an hour to get up and shake off the effects of the previous night's indulgences. And Daffodil looked sad and frightened all at once. Raisin, you should get rid of those mushrooms, man. I think we've all had a bad trip. And Raisin shrugged. Whatever. Hey, is it just me, or is it freaky that most of the graves here are covered in cement or big rocks? He shuddered as he gaped and stared around in the glory of his hangover. Weasel nodded. Yeah, definitely a freak show. I don't even know how we got here, or where here is. We need to find some people or a town name that we can use with a map. Definitely gotta get out of this place, if it's the last thing we ever do. And Wanda shivered. Did you have to say it like that? I can't believe it. We made it. Woodstock! Daffodil gushed. Her friends joined her. Yet, a few hours later, none of them felt up to partying. They'd all gone sluggish, and they stayed that way until dusk. You know, Daffy said to the others, I haven't been hungry like all day, but now I'm famished. Got a weird craving though. I want meat, extra rare. And she looked thoughtful for a moment. Freaky. I don't eat meat. It's like cruel, you know? And Wanda nodded. Yeah, me too. I'd blame Raisin's shrooms, but that was like last night. Raisin looked around in his typical dazed fashion. I never knew so many hippies could smell so good. It's like they're pastries at a bakery, or pigs at a slaughterhouse. Scott smiled thoughtfully as his other favourite storyteller finished a classic horror tale. Madame Raven had a wonderfully engaging voice that fit the mood of the tale. Classics are classic for a reason, he thought in satisfaction. The hills and trees and occasionally open farmlands and pastures blurred by in the bright moonlight to either side. He hadn't seen another car for nearly half an hour, and then, as though by magic, reality synced with his thoughts and a pair of dim headlights appeared in his side mirror. Well, he didn't have to study the lights to be certain. He didn't have to ponder. They were back. The van overtook him and settled in right beside him, once more matching his speed. This had started to get scary. The guy was a lunatic. He reached into a small compartment and took out his revolver and placed it in his lap. Then mumbled in his best movie tough guy voice, "As with the bull, you're gonna get the horns, Mr. Psycho." As if the others had read his mind, the van accelerated and pulled ahead. "Great, go on, get away from me," he sighed out of relief. Then, as their back bumper cleared his front, the old V-dub swerved in front of him, and he saw the nightmare glow of brake lights so close that he could not make out the individual orbs. He slammed on his brakes and swerved, and he felt the trailer lurch and tug. He just knew he was going to jackknife. He pulled on the wheel with all of his might and employed every skill he'd been taught or had learned through experience, and somehow he managed to stay on the road, to straighten, to avoid certain destruction. He had slowed considerably and ended up in the passing lane, about halfway onto the shoulder. Had there been more traffic? He shook his head. Well, there wasn't. Any other time, there'd have been a pile-up. He prayed silent gratitude to the divine, but then his mind turned to mortal vehemence. I need to report them. Stop that craziness before someone dies. He drove on. There was no sign of the van. He lost track while trying to save himself from crashing, and then in a heart-pounding aftermath of relief, he was sure that at any moment he would see the dim yellow lights in one of his side mirrors. He considered stopping in the next town, but he needed to get this load in on time. No way, I just gotta keep going. He encouraged himself as he again pushed the speed limit and rolled into the empty darkness. Almost there, he muttered as he cleared his latest white spot in a road township. He was still in a rural area, but he knew that daylight would soon arrive, and he would reach the suburbs where his delivery was scheduled. He passed a rest stop. Yeah, don't put those in the boonies where they need 'em. He griped to the early morning dark and the non-existent state officials in his cab. He saw hazard lights flashing up ahead, just off of the highway. He slowed and pulled over to the passing lane to give them some space as he blasted by. Only he did not pass. The vehicle, the van, pulled out onto the highway and quickly matched speed with him. This time, they were on his passenger side, harder to see, but the top of the van was visible from his vantage. No point in looking into those windows. Black as the interior of a tomb, he shuddered. There was a traffic light ahead. The open highway had started to give way to the suburbs at last. Oh no, only when I screw up a little. And he saw the light shift to yellow well before he arrived. Naturally! He spat as he tensed and came to a stop. His engine rattled and rumbled and belched filth into the morning air, damp with the dew and now permeated with the stench of burnt diesel fuel. The van had stopped as well. This was it. If there was going to be a confrontation, he hefted his little pistol, and yet nothing happened. The light turned green and he rumbled ahead, and just before the next light, the other driver accelerated and passed him. The van pulled in front of him, and he was ready this time. He rapidly dropped back into the cruise lane on his right. Once more, they were caught at a traffic light. This time, the passenger side window rolled down, and a woman, possibly the one who had spotted the hat, flashed him a peace sign and then grinned at him. Oh, that grin. Full of fangs and surrounded by the pallor and initial decomposition of the crypt. It sent a shock of fear coursing through his heart. He gave up all thoughts of fleeing or fighting as he froze in terror and was lost in those blazing eyes. The eyes of a serpent that holds the attention of its prey before it strikes with deadly venom. He was so taken that he didn't see the door on the van slide open and another face appear. It was a darker shade of deathly grey than the woman's, and spotted a small purple blob on the right cheek. A birthmark in life, but only another sign of decay in the unlife of the vampire. The light changed to green. Scott sat frozen, staring into those eyes and pondering his demise. The miserable little buzzing beep of a compact car horn sounded from behind and shook him from his reverie. The sliding door of the van closed, the window began to rise, and the entire contraption turned away to the left. The dim lights faded quickly from view, fleeing the grey dawn that had begun to lighten the world from the opposite direction. Steady's waiting to see you, the gate guard at his destination warned. I didn't say why. Scott nodded and thanked the older woman in the golf shirt and ball cap. He had no idea why the State Highway Patrol would be there waiting for him. Or maybe someone had reported the crazy van people. Wonder why I forgot to do that. Well, that's normally the first thing I'd do. He pondered his lapetses as he crept into the lot and backed to the appropriate dock. Sir, one of the very serious officers said to him, please step out the cab and keep your hands visible. Scott of course complied. These guys had their hands on their pistols. The fact that there were two surprised him. They normally work solo. The lead one spoke again. Sir, did the inspectors place a band on your trailer door after they checked your load? Yes, sir. Still sealed, Scott confirmed. Can you tell me what this is about? Sir, what can you tell me about the traffic stop just after your inspection? Well, I got a ticket. I put the printout on my clipboard. I can get it if you like. Scott turned slightly towards the cab of his truck. Don't move, the other officer stated firmly. Scott had noted that he looked particularly unhappy. Probably on overtime. I'm pretty tired myself, he thought. Kinda young, maybe a nervous rookie. A third state police vehicle arrived, and the driver and a man who was clearly the supervisor exited and approached them. Regular pig party. Scott had to suppress the nervous laugh. Something was going on. Likely, they suspected he was transporting something illegal. No way, jerks. It's clean, but hey, take your time. I'm a lawsuit waiting to be filled. One of the officers took him over near where their cars were parked, but in view of what the other officers did. They checked around and took some photos of the back end of the trailer. Hey officer, there may be a little damage on the back end. Or there was this aggressive driver in one of those old hippie vans. Scott told him the story. He listened and asked a few questions, principally why Scott hadn't reported the incident. I don't know. I normally would, it's in our rules. This is gonna sound crazy, but I felt like my mind was fuzzy. I don't know. He finished lamely. The highway officer nodded. Were you taking anything? And Scott shook his head. No, sir. I drank a bunch of energy drinks and, well, I was a little over on the straight hours driven. At about that time, the supervisor and his driver approached. Mr. Wilson, we are placing you under arrest. And Scott looked at the man, stunned and gaped. What? His inquiry turned into a squawk as the first two officers, with whom he had spoken, gripped his arms and placed him in handcuffs. The supervisor looked at him with disgust. Capital murder of a peace officer. The body of the highway patrol officer who cited you was in the trailer. The seal from the inspection station was broken. Before you say anything, we have to cover your rights. Scott Wilson looked around in shock as the state police car left the lot. He gaped and stared bug-eyed in confusion and fear. The handcuffs chafed, and of course, as soon as they were double-locked, he had to pee. "Twilight Zone," he muttered to himself. As the supervisor watched him go, a van arrived, a crime scene processing crew. Hours later, the head of the crew spoke with Captain Biles and Colonel Walters. "Weird. Almost no blood in the body. Looks like bites in 4 different places, all over major arteries, like lamprey bites. This guy Wilson is a freak of nature. Definitely murdered elsewhere and then placed in the trailer. He must have a mental issue, surely. He would know that the dock crew would see the body. It was just tossed onto the cargo like a sack. I guess he was going to have them break the inspection seal." Captain Biles was the last to leave the cold storage facility where Officer Trujillo's remains awaited an autopsy. Trujillo was one of his, a long-time officer. He took a last look and then moved back to lock the doors and leave for the evening. As he reached the doorway, he heard a voice, hoarse and dry, but he recognized it as Officer Trujillo's. "Hey, Captain, sir, I feel awful and I'm famished." Biles quickly turned and faced the man on the table, who now sat up, dead flesh sagging and eyes blazing. The man shrugged and said, "I smell really fresh pork. Smells great." Wow, 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 wow. And another one, wow. An absolute fantastic tapestry of horror there, Michael. Wonderful writing as ever. Thank you ever so much for your support, your friendship and your input. It is absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. Guys and girls, as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not smash the subscribe button if you're not subscribed to DMTForestOfFEAR already. And don't forget to throat punch the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT community posts and content. Of course, I'm always on the lookout for brand new stories. If you feel you have the next big hit or just fancy having a crack at writing, please do get in contact with myself at the usual email, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. Many thanks for your patience, guys, over the last week, or probably the last 3 weeks. It's been a bit of a rocky ride, had lots of technical issues. I'm trying to work through the technical issues at the moment. Looks like I need a brand new laptop again. But this is how it goes, how the cookie crumbles, I guess. Of course, I hope you're all doing well and happy, friends and family alike, and trying to keep fit and focused as possible during these hard times. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.